I'm gonna go to some bar and have a martini and a carrot.
Be sure to stick around for my favorite at the end. You won't want to miss it. 1. Paper Mache Bunnies. Paper mache bunnies were the crown jewel of Easter decorations back in the day. These weren't just cute bunnies, they were keepsakes. Made from a delicate paper pulp, they often opened up to hold small treasures like jelly beans or chocolate eggs. I remember carefully lifting the top off one of these bunnies as a kid, just to find a handful of my favorite candies. They were a staple in American homes throughout the 50s and 60s. Their charm lay in their slightly imperfect, hand-painted faces. Some folks found their beady eyes a bit creepy, but to me, they were part of the magic. The older ones are pretty fragile, and if you manage to find one in mint condition, you're holding onto a piece of history. They've become quite valuable today, but I wouldn't part with mine. They bring back too many sweet memories of Easter mornings gone by. Worth today around $200 to $250 for authentic antique candy containers from the early to mid-20th century. 2nd, chenille chicks. You can't talk about vintage Easter without mentioning chenille chicks. These fluffy little guys were everywhere during the 40s and 50s. They were typically made in Japan, crafted from wool and paper-covered wire. Some wore tiny party hats, others clutched little umbrellas made from pipe cleaners, and a few even sat in painted eggshells. These chicks weren't merely decorations, they were personalities. Each one had its own quirky expression, and they brought so much character to our Easter displays. I remember lining them up on the windowsill, watching the sunlight catch their little beaks and wire legs. They were delicate, though. Finding one in perfect condition today is rare, but even the worn-out ones still hold that nostalgic charm. Whenever I see one at an antique store, I can't help but smile. It's like catching a glimpse of my childhood. Worth today approximately $150 for vintage wool chenille chicks from Japan, popular in the 1960s. 3rd, vintage Easter postcards.
If you want to show someone you love that they are a part of your life this Easter, there's a very special way to do it.
Easter cards today are nice, but they can't compare to the old-school postcards from the early 1900s. These weren't merely paper with a printed greeting. They were works of art. Elaborate illustrations, embossed designs, and pastel colors that perfectly captured the spirit of spring. Back in the day, people would mail these cards to friends and family to spread Easter joy. I've still got a collection from my grandparents, some dated as far back as the 1920s. There's something special about seeing the old-fashioned handwriting and vintage stamps. These postcards are a great way to introduce vintage Easter decor. They're relatively inexpensive, and they instantly add a nostalgic touch to any room. Pop one in a frame or tuck it into a floral arrangement, and you're transported back in time. 4. Gurley Easter candles. If you were around in the 50s or 60s, you probably remember these little wax figures. Gurley candles were iconic, and they came in all sorts of shapes: bunnies, chicks, eggs, you name it. Nobody ever actually lit them. They were too cute to melt. I remember my mom carefully unwrapping them each year and placing them on the mantel. We'd dust them off, set them up, and admire their charm. They had this distinctive sweet scent, like vanilla mixed with nostalgia. These candles were made by the Gurley Novelty Company, which started out making votives before realizing that decorative shapes sold better. They became a hit, and now they're collector's items. I still have a few, and every time I catch a whiff of that familiar scent, I'm right back in my childhood living room, waiting for the Easter Bunny. Worth today about $150 to $200 for complete sets, especially in original packaging. 5. Blow mold Easter decorations. Before inflatable lawn decorations took over, there were blow molds. These hollow plastic figures were brightly colored and often lit up from the inside. You'd see them on porches and front lawns all over America. Easter blow molds came in all shapes: giant bunnies, chicks, eggs, and even lambs. I remember helping my dad set up the blow mold bunny on our porch. It was almost as tall as I was back then. He'd run an extension cord, and that bunny would light up the whole street. There was something so magical about it, glowing against the early spring dusk. Blow molds are highly collectible now, especially if they're in good condition with the original paint. If you ever come across one at a flea market or estate sale, don't hesitate to grab it. Not only are they worth a pretty penny, but they also carry a whole lot of nostalgic charm. Worth today usually $150 to $200, with larger items like 21-inch Easter chicks fetching higher prices. Take a moment and hit that subscribe button. It's the best way for us to stay connected, and it keeps me inspired to bring you more nostalgic treasures like this one. And hey, I'd love to hear your stories. Drop a comment below and let me know your favorite vintage Easter memory or decoration. Can't wait to read them. Thanks for watching 6th Vintage Candy Boxes.
For old-fashioned candy store goodness, nothing else to do. Like old-fashioned candy store candy, the kind box makes for you.
Easter candy today comes in colorful plastic packaging, but back then it was all about the boxes. Vintage candy boxes were little works of art. Made from sturdy cardboard, they were covered in vibrant illustrations of bunnies, chicks, and springtime flowers. These boxes weren't merely packaging, they were part of the gift. Once the candy was gone, we'd keep the boxes to store little trinkets or reuse them the following year. I remember one in particular, a giant egg-shaped box with a scene of rabbits having a picnic. I must have kept that box for years. If you're lucky enough to find one today, the graphics alone are worth the price. They make fantastic display pieces and instantly add a vintage vibe to any Easter decor. Worth today between $20 and $50, with rare designs going for more. 7. Cement bunnies. Cement bunnies are a bit different from the other items on this list, but they were equally iconic. These heavy little critters were meant for the garden, but they'd often make their way inside as doorstops or decorative accents. They were sturdy, weathered, and charming. The older ones had chippy paint that gave them a wonderfully rustic look. I always loved seeing them perched on porches or nestled among spring flowers. If you come across one at an estate sale, grab it. They're not merely decorations, they're memories. Every time I see one, I remember the old lady down the street who had a whole family of them lined up on her porch. It's funny how something as simple as a cement bunny can bring back so many memories. Worth today between $50 and $150, depending on age and patina. 8. Handmade ceramics. Back in the 70s, ceramics were all the rage. People would take classes and paint their own Easter decorations. These weren't professional pieces, they were handmade with love and creativity. I still have a ceramic bunny my grandmother painted. It's imperfect, a little chipped, but it's priceless to me. These ceramics had a folk art charm that you just don't see today. They were often painted in soft pastels and had a simplicity that made them feel so homey. Every time I unpack that bunny, I can almost hear my grandmother's laughter and smell her apple pie baking. 9. Vintage candy molds. Before plastic molds were a thing, candy was made using metal molds. These vintage candy molds were typically made of tin and were often used to make chocolate bunnies and lambs. The tarnished metal gives them a beautifully aged look that makes them perfect for rustic Easter displays. I never actually used them to make candy, but I remember seeing them in my grandmother's kitchen, hung up as decorations. They were a piece of history even back then. If you're lucky enough to find one today, you've got yourself a unique piece of vintage Easter decor. They look fantastic displayed on a shelf or even hung on the wall. Worth today between $50 and $200, depending on age and intricacy of design. 10th. Quilted Easter eggs. Handmade and one-of-a-kind, quilted Easter eggs were a big deal in the 70s. People made them from fabric scraps, often repurposing old clothes. They were stuffed with cotton and decorated with ribbon or lace. They had a groovy vibe with their vibrant patterns and mismatched colors. I loved seeing them displayed in wicker baskets or hanging from tree branches. It was such a creative, cozy way to decorate for Easter. Vintage Easter decor wasn't solely about celebrating the holiday. It was about creating memories. These decorations brought families together year after year. They were cherished, passed down, and treasured for the memories they held. If you're feeling nostalgic, maybe it's time to bring some of these vintage touches into your own Easter celebrations. Who knows? You might create memories that last a lifetime.